But first and foremost, thanks everyone for being here. I recognise a few of you, and some of you I don't, but it's lovely that you've come here and joined us today. I'm Brad, by the way, just in case you don't know. People do just come up and go, "You're Brad, aren't you?" So yeah, I am Brad. And today what we're kind of planning, not to sound too much like a designer, but this is a bit of like a prototype thing for us. But if you're not necessarily that familiar with Design Truth, there may be one or two of you that aren't. Design Truth actually started off as a podcast back in 2020. We had two choices. You either made banana bread or you started a podcast. We decided to do the other one. Lots of people listened to it, and then eventually we kind of got to a point where it was like, I wonder what everyone actually looks like. So we did these events, and we actually did talks at some of our early events. But unfortunately, quite a lot of people turned up, and it was a bit like, oh, I don't know if this is necessarily the right format to do this kind of thing. And so the idea today is that everyone around you, I appreciate there are people maybe listening to this or whatever on Spotify or whatever you're doing, but everyone here today pretty much works in a leadership kind of position, whether that be within toys, whether that be within homewares, whether that be within consumer electronics. I think there's one Dyson person here in the building in Shark Ninja's offices. You know, this is quite dangerous territory. I feel a little bit like Switzerland at the minute, a bit of a neutral kind of zone. But yeah, the kind of the premise of today is that we've brought together kind of a created kind of list of people that we hope have got some quite interesting things to say. One person that I know who always has quite interesting things to say is a guy to my left called Chubb. Nick is going to be speaking half hour or so, talking to you about a few things. We're going to have a bit of a break because we all like wine, and then afterwards we've got a live panel discussion moderated by Amy, and then we've got some people from Joseph, Panasonic, so some quite big kind of names here, which is quite cool. But I'm going to pass you over to Nick, and Nick, the floor's yours, mate. Thank you. Do you need this?
Brilliant, thank you very much, Brad. So it's been a little bit daunting to put this together. There's a few reasons for that. One is there's people in this room whose careers I've followed for a long time as a designer. But also when I asked Brad, what do you want me to give a talk about? He said, whatever you want. So there wasn't much of a steer. My thought process to arrive at that was, well, what's something that I care about, but also something that the people in this room would care about? And so just the subject of quality, really, and the quality of the design work that we do, the quality of what we put out into the world, and what is contributing to that level of quality. And so there's a product there that many will know. When I was younger, we were in Edinburgh. I've got an older brother, so that came out in the mid-90s, that product, the BO Sound 9000, and it just screams quality. Now, on that day in Edinburgh, I hadn't heard the words Bang & Olufsen. We don't have Bang & Olufsen shops in Doncaster. And all I knew was my brother thought it was cool. He was like, oh, there's a Bang & Olufsen store. Went into that shop, and it didn't take long to know why that was cool. So I just think that the quality of these products, they can always have quite a big impact on people. Another one, so ice hockey was my main sport growing up, and I played roller hockey before that. And there was a brand of skates called Mission. Now I'd had other skates, I'd had skates before this, skates after this, but just nothing quite like those skates. And another one is I had a Sega Mega Drive, I had a PlayStation, but when the PS2 came out, that was just pretty special as well. And so other people will have these. It might be a sewing machine, it might be a power drill, it might be a cake mixer. People have got these products, and so the quality matters, and it affects people. I know as designers we can be a real cynical bunch, and in reference to Edward de Bono's book, The Six Thinking Hats, we're quite guilty of wearing the black hat quite a lot, very cynical. We know this, right? So at an event like this, it's just the green and yellow hats are quite useful to wear, just to be open, and I think that's in line with what Brad's built with Design Truth and that level of openness. And the green and yellow hats are about looking for the potential benefit in something and looking for the possibilities. And there's just someone close to me said something to me many years ago that just helped frame my thinking when I come to stuff like this, which is, just because you know it, are you doing it? And just because we're doing it, could we be doing it better? So I loved Beano growing up, and my favourite Beano character was Billy the Whiz. Now, Billy the Whiz, he could run to Australia and back in about 20 seconds, rapid, amazing. And I think a lot of design leaders sometimes wish that their designers could perform tasks as quick as Billy the Whiz. And if I reflect back on projects through my career that maybe they went over budget, maybe they didn't get hit on time, I just think very rarely does it ever come down to how individuals, or how quickly individuals performed their individual tasks. I think there's just some bigger levers to pull and a few more things at play there. So just sharing some thoughts on things that I think are contributing to that level of quality. So it's a bit faint, but if that grey bar was all the time and all the budget for a particular project, now the blue bar is our progression through the project. So logically, we've got a certain amount of time and budget left. Now I just know in some projects where you actually are sometimes isn't truly in line with the amount of time and budget that's been spent. We're not always working as effectively as we could be. And so one of the sort of impacts of that is that when we can work highly effectively in our thinking and what we've proven out to be true, and just really pushing it at the leading edge, we're unlocking all this time ahead of us that's more time for refinement and quality. And so I think things that I've spotted of where we can be working ineffectively sometimes is that from an engineering point of view, you could be exploring how something could work and how something could be, regardless of whether it should be that way. And I think sometimes that can just run away with itself. And I get that we need to explore things, but at some point we need to make decisions and do things that are in line with, you know, if you're exploring mechanical ideas that aren't in line with what would be an ideal user experience anyway, arguably it's wasted time, and that time could have gone into improving the quality of the things that did make it through. So if we work backwards from product is ready to sell, there's all sorts of things that if we were the project manager and we had to build a time plan, there's all sorts of things that would make their way into that project plan. And a lot of these things are quite non-negotiable. So how long does it take to ship something from China? How long is the test house saying they need to test it? How long is it going to take to make the prototype? We get this information and it gets thrown into a project plan. And so when we work back, a lot of those activities, a lot of them can be downstream from the design bit. But that design bit it seems to be the only bit that's more squishable than everything else. Everything else seems to sort of not really get debated, it just gets thrown in. But our bit, the only bit that's contributing to the quality of the final output, is the one bit that seems to be getting pinched. And so we must defend that time to think. And sometimes, you know, if we were coming under pressure from, say, a board of directors, and it's like they're finding ways to launch the product sooner as that plan's being made, that is the bit that has a bit of movement in it. And it shouldn't be that way. And so, you know, if you were asked, well, can we do that in 70% of the time? It's not just a no. So the answer is, oh, well, yeah, it could. It's like, well, could it be done in 50% of the time? Yeah, it still could. And the thing is that we don't say no because there's no guarantee of better quality from that extra time. So we're almost weak in the way we're defending it as well. And so sometimes I think we just need to offer a bit more resistance in that, well, no, we can't be covered, and just to relay the values of the business back to those people in that, well, what sort of organisation do we want to be? Do we want to cut corners or do we want to do it right? And sometimes just a bit of a check can help in that scenario. I think the other one is just improved communication in that we shouldn't assume that they know that to shave time off that thinking has an impact on quality. There are other things in life that you can have. If you go with Royal Mail, you can have next day guaranteed delivery. It doesn't turn up bashed up because of it if you went second class. So in that scenario, you can have something faster without a cost on quality. So I think sometimes we just need to make it clear that there is an impact on quality, that we shouldn't assume that they know that. This is the USB logo. Everyone's seen it 1,000 times. The U in USB stands for universal, which is why there's 3 different shapes to show its compatibility. But I always picture someone just kind of like racing to find the right track, and they've gone down one avenue, maybe down another that wasn't the right track, and they're trying to get on it. And so with that in mind, from a product development team point of view, the more time we spend going down these avenues that are dead ends is less time that we could have been sprinting down the right track going further. And so we don't want our product teams to look like this, especially if that blue line represents the products that made it to market. So as a brand, the world is judging us based on what went out into the world. They don't see all this stuff. And again, I appreciate we need to explore to get to that point. I suppose my real point is that, a large portion of my career has been in a consultancy environment, but when I did work in-house, I did work on projects that did get canned, and sometimes I felt the reasoning behind them. Could we have made that? I felt like that decision could have been made sooner, and I think there should be a deeper realization that to be more decisive and make those decisions as soon as they can be made means that we can push the quality of the things that are going to make it to market. I think there's a few words that are really interesting in product design and what we do. One of those is just. One of those is enough. And another one is easy and easier. And nobody really cares as much as we do. The people who are coming up with that original design intent, no one along the process of getting a product to market really cares as much as we do about protecting that design intent. And nor should they, and we shouldn't expect them to. But that word easy and easier, you're trying to get a product through, you work with, electronics hardware engineer, oh, it'll be easier if you did this. You work with a sheet metal fabricator, it'll be easier if you did this. Injection molding tool maker, it'll be easier if you did this. It's like, well, we shouldn't just be rolling in those changes based on those comments as easily as I think we sometimes do. And sometimes those comments are made in areas that we don't have much knowledge in. Now, in some of those examples, we should be having sufficient knowledge to try and challenge it. But things will come up where you don't have sufficient knowledge to combat these things. But I don't think it should stop us from having a really good conversation to say, can you explain exactly why that's a problem? And even if it could be easier, is it easy enough as it is to see it through? Because the reality is that we as designers, we're sort of in the center pulling all these different disciplines together. And the people who are saying, no, if you did it like this, it'd be easier, they don't realize or have any understanding of the value of that very thing that they're saying to change. So I just think there needs to be, whenever I hear that word easier, alarm bells are going off. I go, right, we need to have a real good conversation here. So yeah, just that easy is one to be aware of. So I've pulled this slide straight from an internal training session that I led recently, which is sometimes, whether it's clients, whether it's a board of directors, particular stakeholders, specialist user groups, sometimes we don't have access to those people as quickly or as easily as we wish we did. And so when we do get their input, and we need their input, we need to make the most of it. And so the scenario that we don't want to play out is you're having a review with someone more senior and they say, oh, well, what did they say about this? And the response be, I don't know, they didn't say anything about that. Well, that's on us. That's our job to get that. And there's a great study, a great report by the Design Business Association. It's called What Clients Think. And I appreciate this is more agency focused, but it's the feedback from in-house companies in a report called What Clients Think. And number 2 of one of their most important factors is to work with people who are taking ownership and driving the project forward and are having an opinion and driving thoughts forward. And so we need to be the architect of that feedback and not just allow clients to not say whatever they don't feel like saying. It shows a bit more ownership to go and get the feedback and input that you need. That means we can move forward in a more confident direction. So PRS, product requirement specification, really important at the beginning of a project. And that's the mistake people make. They think it's just the beginning. And the interesting word out of all those is honest. What do I mean, an honest PRS? And so I think the mistake people make is they see it as a one-off thing you do at the beginning, rather than seeing it as this living and evolving document. And it's really powerful. This is not just some sort of formality. If someone just casually fills that out because they think they need to fill it out, the danger with this is you've got a couple of designers and engineers later down the line trying to solve a problem, but we're always trying to solve problems within the confines of the parameters that have been set. If those parameters aren't accurate or they're not true, then there might be a situation where you've got, oh, this would be a perfect solution, but we can't do it because of this. And the person who wrote the document, I'm like, oh, you could do actually. It was like, well, if they weren't there to say that, it means that we're actually not incorporating what could be the better solutions. Bit of lag on this, sorry. With regard to requirements, I think there's a really interesting one here as well, which is I see a lot of confusion between requirements and ideas. And I think too many people talk in terms of ideas too early on. And there's a great episode of Blue Peter with Joni Ive went on Blue Peter, and the presenter says, oh, well, these kids have been tasked with designing a lunchbox. Have you got any advice for them? And the first thing he says is, well, there's your error. You've said lunchbox. The language we use is really important. And so just by saying lunchbox, we've built in all these connotations and ruled out so much, whereas really the requirement, if we spoke in looser terms that would allow for more creativity and different solutions, would be a product that protects our food in transit. Now that might take us in a different direction than a lunchbox. And I suppose, you know, if you were to speak in terms of ideas and throw something into a brief, it might be, okay, well, it needs to be a screen of X dimensions that's mounted to a side wall with a pivoting arm where it can turn through X degrees. But the requirement is really this particular user group can see this, this, and this information on the product from this range of angles. That's the requirement. It might not necessarily need to be mounted to a sidewall. It might not necessarily, it could be suspended from above, or it could be freestanding. It might not necessarily need a pivoting arm. It might just be a screen is spec'd that has the right viewing angle. So it's a really important step because we can close off solutions that would be better. This is Robert Brunner. Robert Brunner was the head of design at Apple, and I met Robert a few years ago at the V&A Museum, and one of the things he was talking about was this idea of very often quite bold and brave design can come from someone who's just on their own, just driving something forward, a very singular vision. And we see it in entrepreneurs and startups, can very often just come from one source. And just that, is there something in that? Because I think in a product design world, I feel like we hear that and we go, doesn't sound very collaborative, doesn't sound like teamwork. And I just think, is there something in that? There's the opposite of that would be, there's a meme, I tried to find this meme, I saw it, I couldn't find it anywhere, but it's basically a chef comes out and says, right, the chef special is going to be a lobster dish with a spicy tomato sauce. Someone says, some people are allergic to shellfish, so you might want to change that. It says, right, it's chicken with a spicy tomato sauce. Someone says, spicy, you might want to get rid of that. It says, right, it's tomato sauce. He says, right, some people don't like tomatoes. Eventually he says, right, it's a cup of hot water, and someone says, you better make that lukewarm. And so I suppose that'd be the opposite, in that we don't want that either. And very often what we see as collaboration can sometimes be compromised. Could be 5 of us in a room right now, 4 people want to go in one direction, I might think we should go in another. We shouldn't necessarily meet in the middle, because meeting in the middle might be worse than both. So I think there's something in this singularity versus collaboration. And I've got another example to talk about this particular thought, which is, this is a BMW 4 Series Grand Coupe M Sport. I think it's amazing. I think it's one of the best products I've seen in the last 10 to 15 years. I think it's fantastic. And I loved it that much, I had to go and find out who the lead designer was, and had a call with him. And so I had a call with Nicholas Hewitt, who was the lead designer of the 4 Series, and he was a French designer who was at BMW for 20 years. And I just wanted to learn about the project and what does that look like to create something so good. And he said 25 individual designers were asked to submit their own personal concept directions. From that, 5 were chosen to deliver them a little bit further and resolve those concept proposals. And from then that was whittled down to 1. If everyone here works in a product design environment, I've never seen anything like that in product design. And I've not fully resolved my thinking on this, but I want to share it because I just think that there's something in that, but I feel like we'd all criticise that and say, we're not very collaborative, but yeah, I think there's something there. And another thing in terms of that culture is, a very good friend of mine built a business in the space of 5 years and sold it for an 8-figure sum to a FTSE 100 company, and this wasn't that long ago. And when they were a startup, the boldness of the ideas, the speed at which they could run with ideas, the amount they were testing and experimenting, and what he found is that after it sold, once they got into that much larger organisation, one of his observations was that he felt like people were just operating more from a position of fear, more that what they were doing was protecting their jobs and not really seeing people who want to put their head above the parapet. And my main thought with that is the last sort of environment you would want in a product design team for a company as big as that. And so I just think we've got to make people feel very safe in their jobs and very safe to try ideas, but to give them the backing to experiment and try those ideas as well, because it'd be quite a dull set of deliverables with the situation I described before. So this is Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is one of the greatest investors of all time. He runs the largest hedge fund on the planet, and he wrote a great book called Principles. But one of the things he talks about is that in a business we should be figuring out what metrics do we believe are important and working back from those. And there's so much nuance within that of what these metrics are that we're choosing. One thing that I think is quite interesting with a design team is what's your capacity of your team, as in how much design can your team deliver over a certain period of time. And so that might be 12 months, which would naturally be a conversation about what your roadmap is for that 12 months. And so agencies, because of their business model, good agencies will know this really detailed, down to hours and days, rather than, oh, well, we can do a bit of that and we can do this over the course of a year. And I think in-house teams, they don't necessarily have the same pressures to know that information, so they might not build it in. And I think it's really important to know really accurately that capacity, because I think it has an impact on quality of what we do, because if we're sitting down with a board of directors to agree what's going to be done over a 6-month or 12-month period, if that's even slightly more than what we're capable of delivering, or it could be way more, it's quality that's going to take the hit, because the likelihood is the expectations are still going to remain to deliver all of that work and those projects. So I think there's a real link there between knowing those numbers and that capacity and the quality of what we end up delivering. So that's just another one. That is my talk. There's a whole load of other thoughts bouncing around in my head, but I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to listen. Yeah. Cheers.